Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a new Clever Languages webinar presented in collaboration with ATI, the American Association of Teachers of Italian. We're very happy to have you here with us today in the second webinar of the series. We're honored to have Daniele De Feo, VP for College University for ATI, here with us to say a few words. Floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to Colette. We're extremely happy for this fruitful discussion and that this is a series that will continue. So we ask all of you to please keep your eyes posted on our listserv. You will receive information for future events. And I'm also in here in absence of Kristen Bichelia, who is the VP of K through 12, who will be joining us, but she has parent-teacher conferences. So on her behalf and on my behalf, thank you to Clad, and we look forward to this webinar.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And that being said, it is my pleasure to officially welcome you to our session, Enhancing Presentational Skills in an Italian Classroom. This is the second part of a series of two webinars that we've had with Ati. And I'd like to introduce our speakers for the evening. We have again Valeria Lupino, who is the lead Italian teacher at Melbourne High School, and she has taught levels 1 through AP and developed and introduced AP Italian to her district. She has also developed curricula for all levels of Italian instructions for her district. She's an experienced AP reader and has held a position on the AP Exam Development Committee. We also have Ivan Ferrero, the World Languages Sales Consultant at Clever Languages. He taught higher education and high school world language for 12 years. He has an MA in Spanish for the University of Connecticut and a BA in English Language and Literature with Translation Studies concentration at the Universidad de León. Thank you very much, both of you. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us today. And thank you, Daniele, for this introduction and for this wonderful partnership with ATI, which we are very proud to have in order to promote the learning of Italian language. The first thing I would like to introduce today, especially for those of you that are joining us for the first time, is just to remind you that we provide a lot of state-specific support that you can access through our website. If this is the first time that you are exploring our materials, just so you know, we have all of these resources for the states that you can see on your screen right now, in which we include information about AP correlations. We also include resources specific to your state, funding and help, or tailored sessions that could help you in your location. And I wanted to just provide a very brief introduction of the resources that Valeria is going to draw on today for her presentation. She's going to use examples from our main Italian series, Davvero, which has 2 volumes. You can see it on the left. And also, she will make some references to our series of readers, Un fine settimana, Venezia, Napoli, Roma, Firenze. And this is what I would like to present today for a little bit. In the previous session, I gave an introduction of Davvero for those of you that are new to our materials. And today, I would like to focus on the readers. Before doing that, I want to remind you that because today's session is going to focus a lot on AP strategies, if you are a current user of Davvero, or someone who is exploring it and has a demo access, remember that you can see the AP correlations for both series, level 1 and 2, by accessing the book online and going to resources, then teachers resources, and you can see on your screen, it's very easy to find the AP correlations. These correlations are presented in these charts in a very easy way so that it's actually helpful and useful for you. And just a quick introduction to our reader series for those of you that are not familiar with it. The Un fine settimana reader series. It's a fantastic collection that does a great mix of storyline and travel guide. So these are very short stories that take place over the course of one weekend in one of these Italian locations that you can see on your screen. We have Roma and Venezia, which are aimed at novice low through novice high level, or A1 for the European standard, and Un fine settimana Firenze and Napoli that range for novice high, intermediate mid, or A2. And if you are interested in exploring them, I wanted to let you know that we have sample chapters available on our website, completely free. You can read the full chapter, see if you like it. And we also include the audios and answer keys for the activities. I'll give you just a very quick tour of the chapters. So each chapter opens with un dizionario visivo, in which we are going to present the main vocabulary that the students will read throughout the chapter. They will see it in a visual way, which makes it very engaging and also helps them become acquainted with the Italian culture. And then once you start reading the chapter, you can see that the story gets mixed in with these cultural footnotes that are going to help the students get more context of the area. As I mentioned earlier, we also have an audio feature, so if you decide to play it in class, this can become very easily a listening activity instead of a reading or a combination of both. And as you can see on your right now, next to the word vince, we also have a glossary at the end of the book that is going to help the students with the more difficult words. At the end of every chapter, we have this cultural spread to help the students become more familiar with those cities and the culture of the places. And then each chapter is going to conclude with these comprehension activities for which you as the teacher have the answer keys accessible on our website. If you are interested in any of our materials, you are welcome to request a free sample, and myself or one of my colleagues at Cletworth Languages will get in touch with you. If you are a current user that has already been in touch with us, but you would like to explore new materials or get more information, just feel free to follow up with your consultant. And after this, I want to now give it up to our wonderful speaker, Valeria Lupino, who is going to present about enhancing presentational skills today.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? I hope so. Okay, excellent. So I want to welcome everyone. I'm Valeria Lupino, as mentioned before. I'm teaching from New Jersey. So I see someone in the chat is here from New Jersey as well. So welcome. I'd like to welcome everyone. Hopefully you're in a warmer climate, a little chilly here in New Jersey in the Northeast. So I'd like to welcome everyone. And also I'd like to welcome all teachers, because I'm not sure if you all teach AP or other levels or other languages. But this presentation tonight, I hope that it not only helps, ciao, salve, I hope it not only helps those AP teachers in the classroom, but really helps those teachers of the novice levels help their students build the skills to eventually get to the AP level. Because at the end of the day, that's everyone's goal, to help our students do that. And I think, at least for myself, I come from a district, just a little background, so it explains a little bit what I'm going to do today, where we only have Italian at the high school. So there's always that challenge that your students come in as little freshmen with, learning ciao, mi chiamo. And in 3 short years, we're asking them to produce pretty high level language. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you guys this evening some of the great resources that are available in Davvero to help our students achieve those goals. So what are we going to look at today? Well, like it was already said, we're going to focus on presentational writing and speaking skills. We're going to talk about it for the novice learners first, and then we're going to build up into the intermediate proficiencies. Okay. We're also going to discuss, like I alluded to, this idea of bridging the gap between level 1 and AP, because I can remember back to when I first started teaching AP and teaching Italian in general, it seemed like such a large gap to get to. So hopefully our discussions this evening can help bridge that gap and make it not seem as big. A minute. So for this discussion this evening, we're going to be focusing on 2 of the AP themes. But as Yvonne alluded to, all the AP themes are covered in the Davvero series throughout both the Davvero Uno and Davvero Due books. For this evening, we're going to focus on families in different societies for the novice level because we thought it was a more attainable topic for novice learners due to the vocabulary, and mostly because for novice learners, they kind of function in the ER2 world for a little bit, and then they move into talking about people with, the lui, lai, and then including themselves, noi, voi, loro, etc. And then for the intermediate and above levels, we're going to focus on how science and technology can affect our lives. It's a very current topic, and it's also something that students can bring prior knowledge to from their other classes that they study at the high school. And if you're fortunate enough to have Italian at the middle school as well. Okay. So writing and speaking skills. In general, a student, when they're asked to write and or speak, what are we looking for our students to do? So most importantly, we're always looking for them to be able to express in one way or another their own opinion and the viewpoints of others. So at the novice level, that's going to be mostly in the io form, mostly as well with the expressions of like mi piace, etc. But what we want them to develop to be able to do is talk about other people and other viewpoints. And that's why it's important to use resources that provide cultural examples for them. Because then this way, they're not only talking about themselves, but they're starting to develop the skills to talk about other people and other people's viewpoints. And since we always want to keep in mind this idea of backwards design of eventually getting to that AP level, in AP, one of the fundamental skills that students have to be able to, when expressing themselves, they have to be able to make a connection to the target language, the target culture. So if we focus on these skills of expressing one's opinion, expressing one's viewpoint, focusing on cultural examples and how they can incorporate it in the written and spoken form, students from a very young age, or a novice level, if you're at the high school, can start to build that confidence to be able to do this at a higher level. The third bullet there I have is explanations, because it's really important that students can start to elaborate. So in the previous webinar, we focused on how students can interpret language, whether it was via an audio, a video, a reading. And we started to encourage them to explain, well, why? Why does that person feel that way? Why? And we asked them in a multiple choice setting or a short answer. So here we're building on those skills because now we want students to elaborate. So for example, they express their opinion, like mi piace la pizza. Ok, ma perché? Perché ti piace la pizza? Come ti piace la pizza? Ti piace la pizza napoletana o ti piace la pizza americana? And we can start to throw in those cultural comparisons with very simple content. They should also be able to express facts and information because they are in the, we'll see later on in the written tasks, they are asked to use sources and they have to be able to reiterate that information and the factual data, whether it's percentiles or graph information to the reader, like in a written form or spoken form. Eventually, we're going to get to the email task and the conversational speaking task. And there, they're going to be asking for information and providing information in a spoken or written form. So they'll be answering questions. They'll be asking for more information via questions. And in the speaking and writing, unlike the interpretive, they have to logically link these ideas together. They have to summarize information and restate content. So in the previous webinar, we really focused on the students rather, gathering this information, building this knowledge bank up. And in this webinar, we're really focusing on getting the students to produce the language. So I'm going to take just a little bit of time, especially for those teachers that may not be extremely familiar with the AP tasks. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to explain them and to just share with you the rubrics. So for the AP exam, and this is our ultimate goal, right? We want to get the kids to the AP level. It's completely possible. My students, they range obviously in their success on the AP exam, but they can get there, right? They start in Italian 1, go through Italian 2, Italian 3, and then in their 4th year of study would be in the AP level. So these are the EP tasks. So for interpersonal writing, we have the formal email reply. And what does that entail? Well, it entails the students they're presented with an email and they have to reply to this email. They have to reply to it using the formal register. So that includes obviously greetings, salutations, conjugations, and being very courteous while they write, because the idea there is that we want to teach them culturally as well. When you respond to something in Italian, you do tend to do it in the formal register, which is something they're not very familiar with. Having studied here in the United States, they tend to be a little bit more informal. So it's a skill that will carry through to their careers. In the email, they will always be asked to express interest of some sort in an event or a study abroad or a program of sorts. And they always have to be able to request additional information. So at the novice level, this is going to look very different than when we talk about it for the intermediate level, because at the novice level, the students are a little bit more limited in their understanding of the formal register, and not so much with greetings and salutations, but more with the use of the present conditional. So it's important that when we do activities in our class, that we start to like introduce them to this idea. So for example, if you're on the food unit, instead of letting the students or allowing them to say, voglio una Coca-Cola, we can already start correcting them and saying, oh, no, no, no. In Italiano si dice vorrei una Coca-Cola. And just slowly introducing it to them and not necessarily giving them the nuts and bolts of the grammar yet, but by using it and modeling it, they soon start to realize, well, I don't know, my professoressa or professore keeps saying vorrei, vorrei, vorrei. I must have to use vorrei. So eventually it becomes more natural for them. The other thing for the novice learner, it's a little bit difficult sometimes for them to formulate questions in a proper manner so that the answer is easier for someone to give. So the email reply or interpersonal writing of any sort is really important to get them to practice that question and answer type of scenario. Last but not least for the writing on the AP exam is the argumentative essay, which on its own sounds very daunting, especially when you tell a student that they're going to learn how to write an essay in Italiano. But from the novice level, it obviously will not be an argumentative essay of any kind, but rather maybe they're commenting on a cultural reading they did, or maybe they are describing or presenting information after they've read information on the same topic. But the idea here, especially at the novice level, we're going to see is that we can already start to introduce sources, and the students can use the information in the sources to produce a writing. So it's not necessarily them just coming up with random things to write about, but rather guiding their writing so that they're either having to use something they learned from class discussion, or something they learned from a video, or something they learned or observed from an image. It's just the idea of them starting to use sources for the foundation of their writing. Okay. So the email rubric, if you're not familiar with this, they are all available on the College Board website, and they're obviously designed for the AP student. Myself, when I use these in my classroom, I use them even at the novice level. I try to incorporate them from as low a level as possible, but obviously I have to make modifications. I have to make modifications because maybe for my novice learner, the wording here, even though it's in English, is just too heavy for them. So I manipulate them. I create them myself in a PDF editor or Google Doc, and then I share it out with them. And I do this just to make them familiar with the language, to try to help them already start to experience the AP style rubric. Okay. And then the essay rubric, same thing here. Here especially, I do a lot of editing because as you see, it focuses a lot on the use of the sources, like if bullet numbers, so if you go horizontally, all the second bullets, the third bullets, those ones really focus on the sources. So I manipulate those bullets to focus what I want it to focus on. So we'll see how I do that a little bit later. But feel free to peruse the College Board website for these resources, because like I said, even if you're not necessarily in teaching AP right now, it's still something that you can implement for the novice learner. Okay, so now the speaking tasks that we're going to be talking about. I'm just going to go over them quickly here because we're going to talk about writing first, and then I'll go more into depth with these when we actually get to the speaking section. But similar to writing, there's the interpersonal speaking and the presentational speaking. So interpersonal, it's a simulated conversation with a recorded voice, and the presentational speaking always is a cultural comparison. So that's why I, at the beginning of the webinar, stated that it's really important that students start to become culturally aware of the Italian culture and how the society functions and what people do, what people don't do, so that they can already have this knowledge and it'll help them with the cultural comparison. And this is the conversation rubric, which we'll look at a little bit later as well. But again, I'm going to discuss how we can mimic these AP tasks even at the novice level. But again, I would highly recommend you use the rubrics regardless of the level you teach, and also to always make sure you're using the most recent rubrics, because for example, if you look in the bottom corner, it has a little scoring note that was added at a recent AP reading. So we're always updating the rubrics on the College Board website. So therefore, if, you know, just to make sure you're using the most up-to-date information for your students so that they know what's being asked of them. With this rubric, there isn't too much editing that you ever really have to do because it opens itself up to almost any topic the student is talking about. And here, the main part of the rubric, if we look at the top row, is this idea of maintaining an exchange. That's the main goal when we're talking about students conversing, whether it's with one another, whether it's with an interview with their teacher, or if it's via this simulated conversation with a recorded prompt. We want the students to be able to maintain the exchange as fluidly as possible. Will they stumble? Yes, absolutely. Will they make mistakes? Of course. But one thing that I'd like to mention as well that I forgot to mention with the other rubrics was that there's room for error in the rubrics. These rubrics should be used holistically and for summative assessments as well, because it's not in these tasks at this point, at least in the learning, that we're nitpicking errors, that we're nitpicking pronunciation. That should be previously done with formative activities. But once they get to the point of using this rubric, it should be summative in nature, and therefore there's that room for error. And also, if you think about it, when you're speaking with someone, you may stumble, you may forget a word, you may lose track of what you're saying. So in natural conversation as well, there's room for error. So there should be a little room for error with our students as well. And the cultural comparison rubric, there's right at the bottom, you'll see again, there were 3 instances where they added a scoring note. And here, the most important thing to keep in mind when working with your students about the cultural comparison is you want to steer them away from making lists as much as possible. So for example, if the cultural comparison was to have students compare dinner, dinner in their famiglia versus dinner in a famiglia italiana, you don't want them to just have a list in the sense of, in America noi mangiamo alle 6. Noi mangiamo insieme. Noi mangiamo in cucina. Noi mangiamo. We just don't want them to produce this chunky list, but rather we want them to talk about their famiglia, for example. So in mia famiglia, noi mangiamo insieme, mangiamo alle 6 perché mia madre lavora, ma in Italia mangiano tutti insieme verso le 7 perché tutti sono ritornati dal lavoro e scuola. So you want them to build their language to produce these ideas rather than just list cultural facts they know. So in general, which seems pretty obvious, but in general, how are speaking and writing different? Well, writing, the student has the opportunity to reread what they've prepared. They can easily self-assess and self-check their work. They can check spelling, they can check grammar mistakes, they can reread things and realize, oh, I missed a word, let me add it in. But in speaking, it provides them a whole bunch of new obstacles. They have to be able to produce the language without being able to press rewind. Right? There's no going back. Once they've said it, they've said it. They can self-correct if they catch themselves mispronouncing something, or if they catch that they forgot to say something, and they can re-say it, but there's no taking it back once it's said. So for students, I believe speaking is one of the most challenging tasks in the world language classroom. So the only way, and I'm sure everyone believes me when I say this, the only way that they can get better at it is the more they do it, the better they'll get at it. They'll become more confident. They'll take more risks with answering questions, volunteering information. But the more we can push them to use Italian in the classroom, the better it will be for them in the long run. And it's really our only opportunity to help them with pronunciation and intonation, is getting them speaking, whether it's through presentations or group conversations. I can't stress enough that speaking and using the language is the best way to help them. Okay, so now let's look at what this looks like with the Davvero series. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Davvero series, I highly recommend that you use their link to access some free samples of their materials. They have an enormous amount of resources that truly helps a student develop from the novice level to AP. Again, I repeat, they use all the themes. It's made manageable for the student, and it builds. Va bene? So here we have a little excerpt from the Davvero Uno series, which is geared for more the novice learner. And you'll see here we have descriptions of families. And then underneath the description of the families are their information cards. At a glance, you can see the language is quite simple, and it is something that every novice learner learns, is la familia. And they also start to learn possessive adjectives and talking about themselves, etc. So how this would look in a classroom is a multitude of ways. But if we want to focus on getting them to start to write, we could have the students read these descriptions, led by the teacher, maybe in a group reading, like a classroom reading. And then we could look at how that information was pulled from to get the information cards. We then would have students mimic the information card there to create their own information card. And then they would use the readings to make their own writing about their family. So here they're using a source to model what their writing should look like. They're not necessarily using the source to incorporate the information, but rather using the source to help guide them write their information about their family. So we want to give them some parameters to follow, because what you have to avoid is a student taking, for example, La Famiglia Calabrese and saying in casa siamo, and then just, repeating, but rather model it for them. Take little pieces and ask them, what is imperative for us to include if we wanted to talk about our family. How does our family look different than the famiglia Caprese or the famiglia Monti, etc. Va bene? And then you can already use the rubrics. So if we look at the rubric, we can modify the third bullet about integration of the sources. We can remove it completely because we're not integrating the information, but rather just using it as a guide. The fourth bullet can be adjusted to focus on development of description about their own families. So we can change the wording so that the students are aware that they need to talk about their own family and use adjectives for descriptors. Maybe you want them to focus on personality traits. Maybe you want them to focus on physical traits like hair color, eye color, but you can really manipulate the rubric to work for you for this task. And then the fifth and seventh bullets can be modified even further to reflect the use of maybe a teacher vocabulary list that you want them for sure to cover certain vocabulary. So here, this activity as presented, it doesn't necessarily say to have them do this, but if we think of the goal of having them write in a presentational manner, we can very easily use this reading to help us do that. Okay. So then there's another example in the Davvero Uno series where they have this little reading about Prendi in casa uno studente. And you can obviously read it for yourself, but in the gist of it is that this organization, Prendi in casa uno studente, allows students to travel to Italia and spend their time, instead of living in una pensione or a una scuola, eccetera, they can live in casa con un anziano. And it helps them, embrace the culture, etc. So how could we use this source from Davvero? Well, first we would read it again to make sure the students understand contextually what's going on, what the goal of this organization is, if there's any vocabulary that we should, cover to help them understand it. And then the teacher would guide them on what would they have to include if they were writing to achieve the goals like of the prompt. The prompt is to describe why they would be a ideal student for this. The steps, though, would be for them to actually create a list, like as they're having the discussion with the teacher, to create a list on the board or your smart board or whatever tool it is you use in your classroom, CamiDoc, etc., to create a list of what should we have in this writing to achieve this goal. And then part of it we want to push them is to have them include why they would be the ideal candidate. So if we look at that last bullet, it really brings us back to the idea of what we want students to achieve when they write. And we want them to be able to express why. We want them to be able to express how. We want them to try to elaborate as much as possible at the novice level, even if the language might be a little choppy or the grammar, because eventually it becomes like second nature to them. They know then in the higher levels, they have to explain why, they have to say how, they have to make those bigger picture connections. So using this attività, an example task to give to the students would be like, leggiamo Prendi in casa uno studente, sottolineiamo insieme l'informazione utile. So there the teacher would help guide them, like I said, to underline all the useful information. Creiamo una lista delle informazioni necessarie per scrivere. So this part where I have A and then the numbered list obviously wouldn't be in the instructions to the student, but rather just as a guide for the teacher of like, what kind of list should we make? Well, we should have una descrizione dello studente. We can guide them to make sure they're using personality traits, their carattere, cosa studiano, etc. Like to describe themselves as much as possible. Poi forse quale attività fanno nel loro tempo libero che forse piacerebbe all'anziano. So here maybe they want to talk about what they do at home with their own family, or what they do just in their free time in general, and why the anziano would like that. And then perché è un'ottima opportunità per entrambi lo studente e l'anziano. So here we're guiding them by making this list and off this very short reading to write their own paragraph. right? And again, it's imperative that we try to help the student understand that if they're given something to read or given something to interpret in the auditory form, that they can pull that information and then produce their own writing. And then again, this is just the rubric that we would then modify to reflect this attività per prendi uno studente in casa. So for example, here, I could say for the second bullet under 5, I could say demonstrates a high degree of comprehension of prendi in casa uno studente. Punto, like I can take out the rest. Va bene? I don't have to have that he integrates the source, the student, but for like presents and defends, I can modify that. I can say presents information about themselves, their family, their free time. Like I can make those bullets very specific to the writing that I want them to accomplish. A minute. So later on in the serie of Davvero Uno, we come across, this is just an example for Perle Italiane, but we come across several examples of where Davvero presents some readings, and then it has activities that go along with the readings. Va bene? So in this example, we have descriptions of different cities and what one could do in those cities. So if we're on the topic, the theme of families and societies and different societies, these are the societies that we could focus the students to talk about. So the students could go, they could read this information, we could discuss them, we can match it up with the images, discuss what do we see, what could we do, how is this different than your city, your town, etc. And then if we proceed, we'll see that Davvero really does a great job of building and scaffolding the content for the student to eventually produce, right? So we had the reading, then we have the student describe the cities and build some vocabulary. So if you look at attività numero 6, then we focus a little bit on grammar because, well, as much as students hate it, grammar is a big part of language. So we have to break it down for them, help them realize how to use it. And then we already start to say, well, which one would you rather visit? So already we're pointing the finger at them. Like, okay, you've read this information, you have this information about these cities, but now out of these cities, which one would you want to go to? And we want to then always force them to say why, right? Perché? Why that city over another city? And then Davvero throws in an audio. So here, the students are not only interpreting the written form of the language, but also interpreting audio. And again, always on this same topic. So gradually, they've built up all these skills. And then they have these little sections in Davvero that are always called adesso tocca a te, where the student has to use all these tools that they've built through these activities to produce something. Va bene? And here we could modify it. So instead of having the student just write a paragraph to describe the city, they could write the paragraph and add further information. Va bene? So what are the benefits of the activities from Davvero from this example? Well, the activities, like I said, they take into account proficiency because it's geared to the novice learner. It covers the ACTFL standards and can-do statements because of how they've scaffolded the activity. It focuses on producing language from interpreting sources. And like I said, it builds on the skills step by step. They have to read, they have to interpret the audio, they have to start to pull information, gather information about a city, research a city, now produce something. So you can still apply the AP rubric, and you can modify it to the task. And in reality, we're human beings. We're teachers, but we're humans and we have a lot on our plates as well. And we should take advantage sometimes of the materials that we have. And in this case, for this one, it's a great way to flip the classroom. It's a great way for students to guide themselves through their learning. Because like I said, sometimes teachers are out and we have to leave work for students to do. And we're fortunate enough to have this series where they have everything set up for us, where the student can go through those activities to still produce something of quality. So we've seen so far of how rubrics can be modified from a very high level argumentative essay task to accommodate the novice writing. We've talked about, well, I've talked a little bit about how readings and or activities from Davvero Uno can be modified to embrace these different writing tasks. I just mentioned, especially with the most recent slide, of how we can take already created presentational tasks in Davvero and have our students complete them with little guidance. And again, that's later on. We're not going to do that, day 1, day 2, not even maybe first quarter. But eventually, we want to take the training wheels off and have our students work through the readings or the audios to produce. And we should just remember that even though they're novice learners, they can still produce meaningful and purposeful writing samples as long as we give them the tools to do so. We break them down, we model them, and we make them manageable. So the readings that I presented so far from the Davvero Uno series, you could tell they were very short. They were to the point, but they used purposeful language that the student, while going through the learning process through Davvero Uno, is building those essential vocab and grammar skills to help them produce the language. Okay. So that's presentational writing. We have quite a bit to cover in the webinar, so hopefully I'm not going too fast. But the most important things to remember with presentational writing, especially with novice learners, is that we want to encourage them to present information on a given topic by expressing their opinion, expressing their viewpoint, combining, if possible, on the topic, some cultural references, always explaining why or how something is or why something is the way it is. And we always want them to use the vocabulary for the theme or the unit you're on. And we also want to encourage them through the use of that rubric that mistakes are going to happen and you'll never be perfect at your writing or your speaking, but that it always has to be comprehensible. Your errors cannot impede comprehensibility. I shouldn't have to be an extremely sympathetic reader to understand what you want to say. So if we expose our students to the rubrics at a very young age, early age of their learning, they become familiar with the expectation. And again, like I mentioned, we really should, though, reserve the use of those rubrics for a summative task, because we do want to always take those opportunities to do smaller writings or shorter writings where we are nitpicking the grammar, the spelling, the rules, etc., so that the students can grow. So now we're going to transition a little bit into a different type of writing. So interpersonal writing, it is different than presentational writing. You obviously still have to interpret information because you're presented with a correspondence of sorts to read and interpret. You still have to provide information. So instead of maybe just talking about yourself, you're providing information in reference to what's being provided to you. And you still have to summarize information. But now you have to set up your writing in a correspondence, as a correspondence, whether it's a letter, an email, etc. So you have to use greetings and salutations. You have to be able to respond to questions. You have to be able to create questions on that same topic. And as I mentioned, it obviously has to be formatted as a correspondence so that you always want to encourage your students to write with the idea that someone's receiving this and going to answer them. So this is the rubric again. We're not going to go through it in great detail, but just as a reminder, the top point is always about maintaining that exchange. So whenever I give my students the task of writing me a letter or writing an email or writing to their classmate or writing to a fictitious person or a famous person, etc., I always tell them to make sure when they're writing, someone could write back. So you want to maintain an exchange. You want to make sure I'm asking for something, or I'm asking for clarification on something, or I'm checking in on something because I have to maintain that exchange. It can never be that I receive what they've written and I can't do anything with it other than read it. So it's really important to encourage the students to even ask very simple questions on the given topic. Okay, so obviously this looks familiar. It's the prompt, the source that we use to have the students write about their own family and create their ID cards. So what's great about the Davvero series is that you can create and manipulate the readings or the sources for so many activities. So here now the students are already familiar with the reading, so we don't have to use more class time of going over it or explaining the vocabulario or explaining why it's mio padre but mia madre. We've already done it, right? We've done it. They've written about their family, they've created their ID cards, etc. So now what are they going to do? Well, now they're scrivere una mail, right? Now here the students are writing, right? They're creating the email. This is really important for them to do from the novice level because eventually they have to interpret an email. So it's really hard to interpret something if you've never actually created one yourself. So we guide them through it. So we tell them, scegli una famiglia a cui scrivere, o la famiglia Calabrese, famiglia Ambrosini, o la famiglia Monti. And obviously they have those readings to go back to. Prepari una mail seguendo gli obiettivi. Saluto a chi scrivi. So gentile famiglia, chi? A chi scrivi? Famiglia Calabrese, famiglia Ambrosini, famiglia Monti. So here already we can tell them, why aren't we saying ciao? Ciao famiglia Calabrese. We can start to talk about this idea of the formal register. Why can't I just say ciao famiglia Monti? Why can I not just say buongiorno famiglia Ambrosini? Why am I saying gentile? What does gentile mean here? Then informazione della tua famiglia. Make sure you talk to them about your family. You're writing to this family to let them know about your family. Maybe your family friends. Maybe you met on vacation. Non lo so. Però you want to talk about your family. So we give them some parameters, some ideas. Con chi abiti, come si chiamano, quanti anni hanno, un po' di descrizione. Like forse descriveranno il loro fratello. Non lo so, ma they're using the vocabolario that we've built up about la famiglia and the membri and ourselves in this email. Poi possono parlare della vita a scuola, their life at school. What did they study? Do they like this class? Etc. Maybe they can mention something about their parents, what they do for work, right? So here in this little short activity, the students can use so much vocab, and it all stemmed from reading about another familia. Then this is where we switch gears. Okay, you talked about yourself. Great. But we want them to ask about information, right? So chiedi altre informazioni. So per esempio, maybe puoi chiedere alla famiglia calabrese che cosa fanno nel loro tempo libero. Maybe they could ask them about preferenze a scuola, preferenze per altre cose, cibo, film, musica, etc. So here we're not stifling the students' creativity with writing, but rather we're encouraging them like, hey, you like to talk about food? Cool. Ask this family about food. You like musica? Perfetto. Ask them about musica. So they don't have to accomplish all those bullets, but we want to explain to them with this task that we can create a correspondence to talk to these family members. And then last but not least, we can tell them how to close out the letter. So saluto per chiudere la mail. So cordiali saluti alla famiglia, in this case Lupino, va bene? Or distinti saluti, etc. So here we then want to obviously encourage a student to reread the letter for errors. But here we're making the student use the tools necessary for them to eventually accomplish the response to an email at the AP level. Va bene? So in the Davvero series, I mentioned these before, the Adesso Tocca a Te. So here it has this activity. And thinking about the interpersonal task, the writing, right? The writing to someone, the writing about someone, etc. So here it says, think about someone famous you admire, and it can be a celebrity, a scientist, a politician, a writer. Select the most relevant information to describe the personality, physical experience, etc. Write down a list of these words. So again, similar to all the other tasks we've been doing, they're focusing on adjectives, personal adjectives, physical adjectives, relationship between people, who people are, what they do, etc. And then we can modify D. So instead of having someone introduce the person that they chose to research to a classmate, they can write to a classmate about this famous person. And reminding the student, as always, that that classmate is going to write back to them. So if we force them to remember that someone has to write back to you, we want to maintain that exchange, they're going to structure their letter to their classmate in a manner in which the classmate can answer. So how do these two examples from Davvero help the novice learner? Well, like we've mentioned, it helps them interpret information and produce information. They have to format a correspondence. It reviews providing information, so giving that info about themselves or their familia or that famous person, etc., but also gathering information, because we want to make sure they're asking questions to get more information back. So what can they do? Well, eventually they can do the AP style task. So if you're not familiar with the setup of the tasks, this is a standard this is the standard way the email task is. These are the instructions, va bene? So do I use these at the novice level? No, not in this daunting format. But what I usually do is I keep the directions. So I tell them you will write a reply to an email message or to a letter. And then I decide, depending on what point we are in the learning, if they're going to have 20 minutes to write, if they're going to have 15 minutes to write, etc. Then I only use, though, these instructions or modified versions of them on my summatives. So it's after the students have had lots of practice in writing a correspondence, do I give them such a structured looking assessment. And then it reminds them, right? Your reply should include a greeting and a closing. So just like the activity I showed you, it walks them through it, right? So if you use an activity similar to that I showed you, when they're presented with these directions, it's like second nature for them. They're like, yeah, of course I'm going to have a greeting. Of course I'm going to have a closing. I'm writing a correspondence. You can't have one without it. And it tells them your reply should also ask for more details about something mentioned in the message. So again, if we use the resources in Davvero and we have them read something and then pretend they're writing to that person, or we even maybe create an email based on something they've read in Davvero, it really forces them to use these skills. So again, here's that Prendi in casa uno studente resource. We used it when we wanted the students to write about themselves being a candidate, right? But now how can we rework this? Very simply, we could take this information as teachers and formulate an email. Va bene? So I tried to mimic what an AP email looks like. Va bene? And again, I would never do this near the beginning of the unit. This is definitely something we build towards, va bene? So I say you're receiving the following email from Prendi in casa uno studente because you had written to the organization to inquire about information for participating as a visiting student. Read the email and then prepare a response. Perfetto. Gentile studente, grazie per la mail. Siamo lieti di informarvi che ci sono molte opportunità di partecipare a Prendi in casa uno studente. La nostra organizzazione ha molte case in diverse città, per esempio Roma, Firenze, Milano, Torino, Napoli, Bari e Palermo. Anche il nostro programma inizia a marzo e finisce ad agosto e c'è la possibilità di abitare con l'ospite per 1 a 2 mesi. Prima di confermare tutto con un ospite anziano avremo bisogno di altre informazioni. In quale città vorresti abitare e perché? Durante quale mese vorresti alloggiare con l'ospite e perché? Dopo aver ricevuto le vostre informazioni saremo in contatto. Cordiali saluti. Giovanna Monti, direttrice di Prendi in casa uno studente. So here the students, I would obviously encourage them At this point, they would be reading on their own, but previously to getting this as a summative, we would have read this email together. We would have gone through the email. We would have figured out what is Giovanna asking us for? Why is Giovanna asking us for this information, etc. And then they would proceed to write their risposta. But eventually, when you're doing this as a summative task, the students know what to do. They know that their introduction lets them know why they're getting the email. The beginning of the email gives them information about the place that's writing them. And then they're asked for information. So the students get used to the format quite quickly if it's something that they have first created on their own. Okay. So now we've talked a lot about writing. So the students have now had opportunity to write about themselves, about their family, about a famous person, to a classmate. They talked about themselves and why they would be ideal candidates. They've responded to emails, but all this time they've been producing language and being able to look over it. So now we're going to move to speaking. So just as a reminder, there's 2 tasks for speaking on the AP exam. There's the interpersonal speaking and the presentational speaking. The simulated conversation, interpersonal speaking, is the most difficult task that students have to get used to doing because they have to speak on the spot. The cultural comparison speaking still allows the student the opportunity to prepare the ideas that they want to cover while they speak. So what skills are essential for students to successfully accomplish the presentational speaking? 100% confidence. So confidence with the content, the topic, and the theme. So going back to that activity that I mentioned, the Perle Italiane, having students go through the unit in Davvero helps them build their understanding of a certain topic or theme. It gradually builds the vocabulario, the grammar, the concepts that surround it so that they're confident to produce the language. I mentioned confidence even in the previous webinar because I truly believe that if a student believes they can produce Italiano or any language rather, they will be able to. They'll take those risks to speak. They have to have substantial vocabulary though to express themselves. So the back of each unit in Davvero, they have the lista di vocabolario utile. That's imperative for them to use, incorporate, etc. I tend to really make sure my students understand the vocabulario that's presented to them, if it's via a list I make or via the lists that are available in Davvero, rather than them always going to word reference or a dictionary, because sometimes they try to do too much. And we really want to try to focus them on knowing essential vocabulario. And then obviously presentational, it helps you become proficient understanding the usage of grammar, knowledge of intonation and pronunciation. And like I mentioned before, the really only way they can get better at speaking is if they practice. So the AP presentational speaking task, as I mentioned before, it's always a contrasto culturale. They're given a topic to talk about. They're given 4 minutes to prepare said topic, and they are not given any resources to do so. So it's really important as we go through the Davvero series or the themes, the AP themes, to have them really understand how is that topic, how does it present itself in la società italiana, con la cultura italiana? What's the connessione? Because if we do that every time we're on a topic, the students will have so much that they can pull from when they do these contrasto culturale. So after they prepare for 4 minutes, they rack their brain of what they remember about their culture and the target culture, they will record a 2-minute presentation on the topic, but they have to make reference to both cultures. So, Davvero uno, very novice, beginning, but then you can even tell by the page numbers or near the beginning of the book, we have these ID cards. So right away, students can do a very simple contrasto culturale. The teacher could get varying state IDs, not even from the state the kid lives in, like any state ID. And students can start to compare them. Okay, how is the Italian ID different than the state ID of Washington? Non lo so. Of Oregon, of New Jersey, non importa, va bene? Like what's the same, what's different? So they can maybe create a Venn diagram or a T-chart to start to list similarities and differences of information, where the information is. Is it sopra? Is it sotto? Is it accanto? So you can use like directional, proportional location to introduce another grammar point if you want. So then the students using that list will just make a quick cultural comparison speaking, but we'll guide them through it, remind them to introduce their topic. What are you talking about? Oh, I'm talking about these carte d'identità. Okay, is it of a studente? Is it of, non so, un adulto? Di chi è? So, and then give that information. La carta d'identità in New Jersey ha questa informazione, ma invece la carta d'identità per Italia ha questa informazione. C'è la bandiera italiana, ma non abbiamo la bandiera degli Stati Uniti. Like, so already we're starting to have them use this invece, è simile, è diverso. So they're building that contrasto vocabolario on a very simple image of a state ID. Later on in the presentational writing, eventually, once the intermediate section comes along, there's one of the sources they have to interpret is an infographic. So I like to already expose my novice learners to infographics. So here we have an infographic of Italia in numeri, right? And it breaks down certain things like 34 templi romani, 60 milioni di abitanti, va bene. Very simple, direct information with a little visuals. So how could we use this for a contrasto culturale? It easily lends itself to one because this is all about Italia, va bene. So what could the students do? The students could then create their own infographics about their country or state. They can use the one about Italia as a guide, so noting like what kind of information is being used, and then again using the infografica d'Italia and quella americana or quello dello Stato, eccetera, o del paese suo. They can do the contrasto culturale. So here at the novice level, it might be very much so Italia ha 60 milioni di abitanti, ma invece in New Jersey abbiamo bla 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 milioni di abitanti. In Italia ci sono 100 tipi di pasta. In New Jersey ci sono tantissimi diners. Non lo so, va bene? Però they're making these simple contrasti that eventually, using this contrasto vocabolario, will help them build to the higher level contrasto culturale. Okay? It's important to note that not all presentational speakings have to be cultural comparisons, but having the students learn the skill to compare is key. Va bene? So for example, here we have this idea of different generations. Va bene? So as informazione, little letture of all different generations. And then again, if you look at the adesso tocca a te, it says to talk about your own generation, va bene? Comparing it to other generations. So again, here they're just presenting information about themselves and their generation, but they're still doing a comparison, va bene? Because we really have to emphasize that vocabolario for them to be able to do a comparison of invece, somiglianze, differenze, entrambi, l'uno e l'altro. Non lo so, però have them really use that vocabolario. So as I mentioned before, the novice learners are most daunted, well, actually even my intermediate learners, I'm not gonna lie, about the interpersonal speaking. The conversation task is tough, right? Why is it tough? Well, because you still have to speak in a given amount of time, but Now you have zero prep. You're given a couple of questions and you have to produce the language. You have to be able to talk on the spot. You no longer can give yourself time to process in the sense of, well, okay, what contrasto culturale how do I want to attempt this? No, there's no time for that. Now you are presented with a task where you have to think on your feet. Again, they're speaking, so they have to be confident with pronunciation and intonation. And again, here, even more so than the contrasto culturale, knowing vocabulario would be extremely beneficial to them and boost their confidence. So going back to that carta d'identità activity, and as you may have realized now, I tend to what I like to call double dip, where I'm not only using one activity once, but I'm using it as many times as possible in different ways. So here we're going to have a student. The objective is to gather information via a conversation. So students will prepare questions to ask a classmate with the goal of creating their ID card. So here the students have to think, what kind of information do I have to get from my classmate to be able to create their ID card? And then the students will engage in a conversation and the production would be the finalized ID card. So here, obviously, they're not answering in a timed situation, but it's not necessary to do that yet because, well, they don't have the tools to do it yet. So we can't ask them to do something that they're not ready to do. So because the simulated conversation task is the most difficult task to mimic in the classroom, the best possible way, as I think, to get students comfortable with the task is to get them speaking with and to one another. So the more confidence they build, bantering back and forth with their classmates, even if they've prepared questions, will eventually give them the confidence to be able to produce the language in the simulated conversation. So here's another example. Again, using the resources that Davvero uses, they're authentic, real resources. So I've already cut down my time in trying to find a source to have my students interpret and produce an activity from. And like I mentioned, everyone's time is really precious. So you should really take advantage of the resources that are available. So here we have an example of an infographic, which again, will eventually help them down the road with the argumentative essay because they have to interpret these. So what are they doing here? Well, again, they're gathering information via a conversation. So students could pair up and read through the infographic together. So here they're using each other like a think, pair, share kind of thing where if they're having trouble with vocabulario, they can work through it, they can interpret it, etc. And they then will in turn prepare questions about family to interview their classmate about. The students again will engage in a conversation about the family and the end product. We can even go back to presentational writing is that they could write a description of the family, or if we want to keep it in a spoken assessment or task of sorts, they could record a memo, a voice memo about the familia. But again, the information they gathered was through that interview with their classmate. We could also then, if it's a recorded memo or a written response, we could then incorporate again the idea of a contrasto. How is your family different? How is your family the same? Again, reinforcing that vocabulario. So the interpersonal speaking looks like what you can see now on your screen. Well, on the AP, I've given you an AP example, which is right from the College Board website, which you have access to if you would like to get examples for your classes to use. Well, but here, the students, it's good to expose them to this task, even at a young novice level. So I created one based on a family. Va bene? So, for example, the idea here is that the gray part I would be saying out loud to my students, and then the to part is the student. Va bene? And when I create these, I try to mimic the language that the AP one uses as much as possible to try to familiarize the student with those types of words. Like, for example, if you look at the third to, it says, rispondi e accetti la proposta. So right away, the students start to get used to this idea of what's a proposta? Oh, it's a proposal. Oh, it's like something I have to agree to go to or not agree to go to. Bene. Or rispondi ma offri un'alternativa. So they're always getting used to this vocabolario. So here I've mimicked the AP task, and I would do this live with my students, where I'm the gray part and they are the two part, and I time them. I get a timer out and I time out 20 seconds and I beep so they know when they have to talk. So for example, it would go something like this. So remembering I'm pretending to be a novice student, va bene? So buongiorno, come stai oggi? And then I see that it says saluti e rispondi con dettagli. All right, so I'm a novice speaker. So buongiorno, come stai oggi? So beep. Io sto bene, grazie. Sì, io sto molto bene. Oh, buongiorno, buongiorno, io sto molto bene. So that's something you might actually get as an answer because the student might have missed that it said saluti. But then as they were staring at the traccia, they're like, uh-oh, I didn't salutare. So let me do it at the end. And that's okay because we're going to use the rubric to help them remember that they have to continue the exchange in a logical manner. So then the conversazione would continue. Fantastico, anch'io sto bene. Senti, stavo pensando alla tua famiglia. Non mi ricordo bene. Hai una famiglia piccola o grande? Come si chiamano i membri in tua famiglia? Beep. Sì, sì, io ho una famiglia molto grande. Ho una madre, un padre, 3 fratelli e una sorella. Mio fratello si chiama Mark, l'altro fratello si chiama Steve e poi c'è John. E mia sorella è Mary. Beep. And then we'd go through and through it again. So the more you do these tasks live with your students, the more comfortable they will get. And again, I could have taken the information from the readings we did earlier with those different families or based the information off the writing they did. Va bene? So overall, we've seen that even at the novice level, we can do AP style tasks with the material that Davvero provides us with, even if we're maybe adding a different spin to it. But we are using the resources to really benefit our students to help them grow. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the intermediate learner. So at the intermediate level, we really want to try to stay truer, closer connected to the actual AP sources and AP resources and AP tasks. Because the goal here is that these learners will be our AP students. Va bene? So just as a reminder, it's the same tasks. We have interpersonal writing, presentational writing, but now we're going to look at how in-depth these tasks go and how they change, but how Davvero does still an awesome job of providing us the resources to make it possible for our students. So in Davvero 2, which is the book that would be more used for an intermediate level, we have this example. Oh, and remembering that for the intermediate level, I'm going to be focusing on how science and technology impacts our life. Va bene? So here in Davvero 2, we have a reading that is presented to us where I have the articolo, and then we have an audio. So right away, the student is presented with 2 possible sources. So we have to now teach the student what to do with this information. So the idea here is that we're trying to prepare them to answer big idea questions, because that's what the argumentative essay task is. It's not a simple yes/no question. It's okay, yes, but why? Okay, no, but why type of question. Va bene? So with this example, the students are provided the 2 sources, like we saw, the articolo and the audio. Then they interpret the sources. They want to figure out what can they use from those 2 sources to support their viewpoint on, secondo te, l'intelligenza artificiale beneficia la società o la peggiora? So here they have the prompt and now they're thinking to themselves, okay, I think peggiora la società. Now they have to go back to those sources and they have to see what can they use from those sources to support their argument. And again, I can't stress enough, it's support their argument, not how can they summarize the source to answer that question, but how can they use the source to support their argument. Later on in the Davvero series, we come across these other great resources, va bene? And you can tell from the page references at the top that it spans a good chunk of a unit, va bene? So they're given the articolo here. We have an infografica that they have to interpret, and they have an audio. So here again, now they have 3 sources, which directly mimics the AP task. And again, they have to interpret these sources, and they're given a prompt. Secondo te, la sostenibilità sia una maniera positiva per migliorare l'ambiente? Perché? Va bene? So here, this question is directing them to the fact that it is positiva, va bene? But it's a perché. So they could say, no, non è una maniera positiva per migliorare l'ambiente, ma invece è negativa perché, va bene? But again, we're giving the students, we're guiding them, we're molding them into being able to use the information in the sources to support their argument. Because what's our goal? Our goal is for them to be able to be evaluated by this rubric, for them to look at this rubric and say to themselves, yes, I did demonstrate a high degree of comprehension of the source's viewpoints with very few inaccuracy. Yes, I integrated content from the sources rather than summarizing. Yes, I provided and defended and presented the information necessary to support my opinion, my position on the task, va bene? And the more we keep using these rubrics, the more the students produce writings or speakings that are perfectly aligned with the AP exam. So the presentational writing, the argumentative essay, in a nutshell, the idea is to really enforce in the classroom that regardless of whether it's a written source, an audio source, a graph, a chart, etc., we're not looking to have students summarize the information. Va bene? The activities in Davvero might help us build to not summarizing, because through the activities we're pulling vocabulario, we're answering questions, we're making connections, etc. But eventually, as a summative, we want to answer those big idea questions with those resources. We want to learn how to support our opinions with sources. So in the interpersonal writing at the intermediate level, there shouldn't be any flexibility in the register. By this point, the students should be completely comfortable with the task. So here's another look at the task. They should be knowledgeable and know that they're writing a correspondence. They have to have greetings. They have to have closing. They have to answer questions. They have to provide information. They have to ask for further information, and it has to be in the formal register. So by this point, if we've modeled the tasks following the very first example that I gave for the novice learner, by the time they get to the intermediate level, the students should be ready to do so. So now we want to flip the classroom, right? We always want the students to be responsible for their learning. So how can we use the resources that Davvero gives us to help them accomplish these interpersonal writing tasks? So here we have several different examples of the reading from pagina 82. We have an activity that's taken on from a little bit further, and it has a fase 1, fase 2 from 95. And then we have another audio having on pagina 237. Va bene? So what you'll notice is that why I put the page references to really show you how throughout the entire series, there's authentic resources that you have access to and your students have access to. But what can they do? Well, with that first resource, that reading, va bene, the reading was about, there are 2 news stories, and the students have to decide which one is true and which one is fake news. Va bene? So students will read the 2 news stories, and then upon deciding which one is true or not, the students would write to the news site and inquire about the information in the article to show how the article was true or false. So here students have the creativity to decide if they want to go after the fake news or inquire more about the real news. So we're using a resource, an authentic resource, and we're having them apply these AP skills. In the Fase 1-2 example, the students will research what Quest IT is via the source presented on page 95, Fase 2, and then the students will write an email to the creators of Quest IT requesting to be an intern for Quest IT by proposing their idea for a new tech that will help society. So we're sticking to the theme. We're using the resources made available to us, but we're making a spin on it to apply to the AP task. And then last but not least, there's an audio interview. Students will listen to the interview and then prepare an email to Flavia Zanchi, who is the president of the Associazione Animali Liberi. So here we've covered a bunch of different topics for our theme. We've made a spin on the resources that are made available to us so that students can achieve the interpersonal writing task. So we want to use the resources to help the students interpret sources and present their viewpoint on an argument for the argumentative essay. We want the students to be able to use resources to prepare correspondence about given topics. And then obviously at the intermediate level, speaking is extremely, extremely important. So these are the instructions for the contrasto culturale as they appear on the AP exam. You'll see it says you have 1 minute to read the directions for this task. Which are the ones presented to you. And then if you're not familiar with the AP exam, the instructions then say you now have 1 minute to read the topic of the task, and then they have 4 minutes to prepare. So I'm not going to lie. I tell my students to ignore the directions because, well, they're so familiar with them from class that why not bundle in those extra minutes into your prep time? So that's just a little thing. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for, saying that out loud, but they know the instructions. So there's no reason for them to waste any precious time during the exam. So I tell my intermediate learners all the time to take advantage of the minutes and apply it to their prep time. So let's look at the Vero again for resources that help them do the contrasto culturale. So here we have one that's already done for us with the Addosso Toccata in referenza to the manifesto. We have an example of a video that they can watch on a certain topic. They can watch the video on it's a pubblicità, and they can incorporate the knowledge that they learned from this video in their contrasto culturale. And then last but not least, there's the infografica again, to have them interpret it and create a contrasto culturale. So what can they do? So with the manifesto, they can present useful ways for good communication. So they're kind of dipping into the idea of the argumentative essay where they're presenting their viewpoint on something, but they're doing it via a spoken prompt. For the video, students will present their views on internet privacy, the positives and negatives of being online, and students will have to incorporate the source into their presentation. So here, we're kind of using the techniques that you would use for the argumentative essay of incorporating the source into your contrasto culturale, into your presentational speaking. And then last but not least, students will look at the infographic on page 338, and they will prepare a cultural comparison about the habits here in the USA or in their their culture. So here we're using a bunch of resources bunch of skills rather that we've built throughout the class, the unit, the years of studying Italiano, and we're having them create speakings about it. So then here comes the most feared task, as I mentioned before, the interpersonal speaking. So at the intermediate level, They've built up the confidence on how to ask and answer questions. They've built up the confidence to banter back and forth with someone. So it's really important. This is just the task again, which we already covered about having the 20 seconds to record their response, etc. It's really important that at this point in their learning, the students are able to really truly be given a topic and to chat about it. And the chatting maybe is like 3-4 minutes long. They have to be quick little back and forths of information because the task itself for AP is very much quick and back and forth. We want to try to give them that feeling of thinking on their feet as much as possible. A minute. So how can we reuse these resources that we already saw in the other tasks? Well, the students can listen to the interview with Flavia Zanchi, and then they can use the information in the interview and the information in the reading to interview a classmate on the same topic. But different from the novice learner, here they're not going to have time to prepare the questions. They're going to read the source, they're going to listen to the interview, and they're going to just talk to their classmate. Similar to the next activity, the students will read the information about the cities at risk, and the teacher now will prepare the simulated conversation task. So the students here aren't preparing the questions on the spot, but rather are now going to be presented with questions that they have to answer. So the first activity helps them prepare for this task because they have to come up with those questions based on the topic and go back and forth with a classmate. Whereas the second activity, they read about these cities at risk, and now they have to be ready for the teacher to do the simulated conversation with them. And remember, you can do these live right in your class with your classes. It's not something that takes a lot of class time to do. And I'll be honest, once you start making these little tracce, they don't take too long to make if you're making it based off of a source. If you're making it based off of a video you guys watched in class. If you, for example, this is going to be about the città a rischio. So it says, fai una conversazione col tuo amico Gianni. Prendi parte alla conversazione perché Gianni vorrebbe imparare di più delle città a rischio. So the kids already know, like, oh, this is about the città a rischio reading we did in classe or we did for homework, etc. And they're already ready to go. On the AP exam, they obviously won't have that benefit of knowing what the conversazione out in the sense source the info came from, but we want to build their confidence. We want to make them comfortable with the task. So here again, I would say the great part out loud. I would pretend to beep. Well, I wouldn't pretend to beep. I would beep, and then I'd start the timer for 20 seconds. The students would saluti e rispondi e dai una spiegazione. Beep again. I continue again. And you'll see that there's simple things, accetti la proposta, and then there's offri suggerimenti. So they're building, right? Rispondi e descrivi un'alternativa. Like, oh, wait, I have to describe an alternative. I can't only just say yes. I got to also give an alternative. So we're building on their speaking skills. But again, basing the whole task off of reading they did in class. So I know I have gone through a lot of information in, well, not so much time. But hopefully the biggest thing, the biggest pull away from this webinar this evening is that we can use so many resources that are made available to us in the Davvero series to build the skills and the confidence in our students at the novice level to help them grow to AP. Hopefully you saw the benefit of using those AP style skills at the lower levels with the rubrics, maybe modified for the task, but using it to already get them used to these tasks. So in general, putting it all together. So as I mentioned, starting with AP style task in level 1, it can only help them develop this confidence. We want to try to expose them to as much content-rich vocabulary as possible, which is really easy with the Davvero series because all the material is authentic. It's super rich with vocabulario. We want to try to increase the spoken interactions in class as much as possible so that they can focus on pronunciation, intonation. We can guide them. We can help them not sound like monotone robots when they speak. And just reminding the students that perfection does not exist. And remember, the rubrics allow for that error. We're all human, and we should just remind our students that they are too. So when we're using the rubrics to grade them holistically on summatives, it gives them that little flexibility, that comfort. And last but not least, just a reminder to always incorporate the themes from level 1 through AP, spiral that content, and again, really take advantage of the Davvero Uno and Due series because they incorporate everything that we need to help our students achieve these goals. So hopefully it wasn't too much for you. So, grazie.
Thank you, Val. And I think it was perfect. I don't think it was too much. And we actually have a few questions.
Sure.
So let's go for them straight ahead, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Great. So the first question we have is, how long do you use Davvero Uno? So how many terms or semesters, and if you completed the book, like all the chapters?
Okay. So like I mentioned before, so I have, we do not have in my district, Italian at the middle school. So at the high school, I use Davvero Uno, starting in Italiano Uno, the level 1 class. And then I carry it through into part of the beginning first and second marking period of Italian 2. And then I switch to Davvero Due, technically switch to Davvero Due in the middle of Italiano 2 and carry that right through into Italiano 3 and in AP as well. The thing to remember, though, is that I always have the Davvero Uno series in my classroom. So even in Italiano 2, when I make this quote-unquote unofficial switch to Davvero 2, the Davvero Uno is always there. So even in level 3, I go back sometimes to Davvero Uno because it has a resource or an activity that I want to use. Another thing to remember is that I know we're always short on time in classes. So because the Davvero Uno and Due are accessible digitally for the students at home, we do tend to be able to cover a lot of the information and quote unquote chapters in the book because a lot of stuff they're doing also on home. They're accessing the extra resources, the little assessments, the check-ins, etc. So it is doable. And because of how it's structured, you kind of don't have to do every single attività that's presented. You kind of need to just make it work for the topic you're on. But in a gist, Italiano Uno and like metà di due for Davvero Uno, and then Davvero Due kind of takes over.
Fantastic, thank you.
Mhm.
Then the next question we have is from Cameron. This is a bit longer, but I'm gonna give you some context.
Sure.
So, right. So this person is a French and Italian teacher who launched an Italian program 3 years ago and is hoping to have a combined 3 AP Italian section next year. But the principal is intending on canceling the Italian program. And the main question here is if you have some resources that you can share so they can provide to the administration and inform them as to why Italian is valuable program to offer, especially at art schools where students do a lot of visual arts, theater, dance, music, etc.
Sure. So I'm sorry to hear that there's this chance that the Italian program could be canceled. First and foremost, what's really important to have in my opinion, have administration know is that Italian should be held to the same quote unquote importance as French or Spanish, which maybe in some districts tends to take priority. But what's important, you could present it in a way that, especially at an art school, Italian is, and I mean, I'm not trying to poo-poo French or Spanish, but Italian is like literally the cultural hub for art. So if you look at it in a cross-curricular way, you could have, you could propose that students could maybe do cross-curricular work with maybe their art history classes or their theater classes. or even the literature classes, and then presenting the AP themes, it'll really show and emphasize the importance of these AP classes because it really helps students broaden their opportunities for different careers and university studies. So in my opinion, I think it's really imperative that the administration can see how offering more than one language to the students really makes them like global citizens. And like I said, that cross-curricular connection might help bridge the gap for them on why Italian is an important topic to study. So.
Great, thank you. Then another question that we have is if you have a list of recommended novels, short stories, or longer readings for use in the level 3 or AP class.
Yes. So for the level 3 and AP class, also because literature tends to come up in the interpretive section of the AP exam, I tend to use excerpts from different novels, like even something like I Promessi Sposi, or there's a few novels available online, etc. But another thing to remember is if you use even just, for example, the readers that Yvonne mentioned at the beginning of the section, the readers, although they might not be like authentic, quote unquote, literature, like from an Italian author, it really exposes students to the same type of language that they would find in a novel. And it also helps them with the contrasto culturale. Another thing I tend to do is like something difficult, like an excerpt from Dante, or something difficult like from the novel that's now famous too because of the TV show on HBO, My Best Friend. I try to just take excerpts that are available instead of doing an entire novel too. So it's important that even if you can find a chapter excerpt to use, that would be great. If you also would like to contact me, I do have like other lists of, novels that I've used in my class with success. So see.
Great, thank you. Then the next question would be, how important is it for a student to know how to produce the passato remoto in written or spoken language on the AP exam?
Oh, I'm happy someone asked about the passato remoto. So the students do not have to produce the passato remoto in their speaking task or their argumentative essay or their interpersonal email, but they do have to be able to understand the passato remoto in, for example, with literature or historical texts. In the class, it's important to expose them to it, but they don't necessarily have to understand the nuts and bolts about producing it. We also try at the AP Development Committee, we do try to limit the sources that use the passato remoto, but unfortunately, sometimes it's completely unavoidable. So my suggestion is to make them aware it exists, make them be able to understand it, but don't force the use of it. So.
Perfect.
Mhm.
And then coming back to Davero, how many
Yeah.
chapters do you get through in your level 1 courses? So chapter 0 to what?
Well, I'll be honest, it does vary year to year, just depending on the school. But in Italiano Uno, I try to at least get through, I would say 3/4 of the book, because I really want to cover as much as possible before summer kind of thing, and before they take this big break, and then I have to be realistic, aren't practicing Italiano very often in the summer. And then this way, when I come back in Italiano Due, I kind of take a step back and do the vocabulario, etc., of what I left off on, say.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. And then do you ever have to supplement with additional vocabulary lists in order for you to for your students to find success in completing the activities?
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier on in the webinar. Me personally, I try to stick to the vocabulary lists that are presented to the students, whether it be in the Davero series or in the readers, because I find I want them to be quote unquote experts on that vocabulario. Doesn't mean that they're not free to look up other words. They are, but my fear with exposing them to too much vocabulario on one given topic doesn't make them experts in anything. It kind of just makes them flip-flop around with vocabulario. So I try to focus on the lists that are provided, and then maybe if in class discussion, given a different class every year, certain words come up like, oh, señora, the word for, I don't know, I know the word for building is in there, but the word for building isn't in there. How do you say building? It's important for me to know it so we can talk about this. Then I give it to them. But I really try to just focus on like very pertinent vocabulary that's needed to talk about a certain topic, because even on the AP task, as long as they have that fundamental framework for the vocabulario, they'll succeed on any task. Sí.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Ivan, I think we have a question that maybe you can help us answering, which is regarding the programs. And is there a plan or a goal on creating an Italian version of the reporters, of reporteros or reporter francophone?
Thank you so much, Antonino, for that question. Yes, there is a plan that we are working on. Unfortunately, we cannot share any previews of it yet, but definitely, if you are interested, as soon as we have more information about it, we will share that with you. But definitely, we do want to do this. We're creating a series that will be very similar to the reporters one. It should be for 2026. That is the plan. No, grazie a te, Antonino.
Perfect. So I think that was the last question, unless we still have time. So if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to. I'm gonna take this last few minutes to give you some more time just in case. To start thanking you again, Ivan and Val, for being here with us. It was amazing, great presentation. And we're very happy to have done this series with Ati as well. We want to thank them for the opportunity. And we still invite you to come and visit our webinars. We have some other webinars regarding Italian and other languages as well. Next week, we're going to have our last webinar of the year on the 12th. That's going to be at 7 Eastern time. And this is going to be creating real world context for Spanish communication in the classroom. Very good for anyone, even if it's going to be based in Spanish examples. I think this could be helpful for all of you. I'm going to leave the link where you can check all our webinars and where you can also sign up for this one. And yes, I think that would be it. I want to remind you that we will send you all the recording, the PowerPoint presentation. We put the link before in case you want to request a certificate. I'm going to put that now again, just in case. And if you want to ask more questions to Valeria, if you want to ask more questions to Ivan or to any of us, you can send us an email at both marketing@collectwl.com. We will put you in touch. And just one final thing, we would really appreciate to hear from you, to know your feedback. We want to know what you liked, where we can improve, if you would like another series regarding these topics, or if you want to hear more about Valeria or about us. So we just put the link for the feedback form. I'm going to put it again just in case. Yeah, this is the one. So please give us your feedback. And again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Grazie. Ciao.